Win big with new DRF All Access past performances. With one best-in-class product, you now get all three past performance formats. Go to DRF.com and use coupon code ONEFREEPP for a free single card today.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us here on the Daily Racing Forum YouTube. I am Gino Buccola alongside David Aragona. We have a preview for you of a graded stakes race on Saturday out at Belmont at the Big A. This is race number 7. It's the Grade 3 Bold Ruler. But David, it's also a very fun time in the world of horse racing right now because the Breeders' Cup pre-entries just came out. Anyone can access those right now at DRF.com, shop.drf.com if you want to check out and get your handicapping done ahead of time because the draw will be on Monday of Breeders' Cup week. So I know you like to do the homework, and it's nice when we can start doing those replays, looking at those charts and getting a little work done.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to the Breeders' Cup next weekend. And these 3 stakes races at Aqueduct, I think they've got some horses that are maybe a cut below the quality to participate in the Breeders' Cup, but they faced off against some horses that we will see out in California next weekend.
Let's take a look at the field here for the Bold Ruler. This one, not a pretty competitive group. You have a horse like Top Gunner who's going out for the really hot Brad Cox barn right now. So with those connections, they're going to take a lot of money. Scotland was a highly regarded 3-year-old, hasn't really taken that step at 4, probably a little disappointing coming off of the 3-year-old results, but those will probably be the top 2 in here.
Yeah, it's an interesting race because everybody in here has credentials to win a race like this. I think the big question for a lot of them is their current form and whether or not they're ready to run that graded stakes quality performance this Saturday.
That's a great point. That's probably why they're at this grade 3 level versus a grade 2, grade 1, just a lack of consistency or kind of going in and out of form sometimes. Let's see what our friends at Timeform US think, because I thought the pace scenario in here was a little bit murky, and it doesn't surprise me to see that this one favors front runners because while you have a couple horses who wouldn't be surprised to see them on the front end, David, there really aren't many that are dead set, need the lead type horses in here.
No, there really is not a ton of speed signed on. And I think with the number 1, Little Vic, drawing the rail, I think that kind of dictates the plan to Kendrick Carmouche to send him from the inside. He did run well with an aggressive ride last time. So I think we'll see him forward. The number 5, My Buddy B, typically is able to show speed against this sort of class level. And the number 2, Top Gunner, is kind of the wild card with regard to this pace scenario because he's got the speed to be forward and potentially even on the lead, but he's been successful from off the pace in his last couple of starts. So I don't imagine they're going to tinker with that plan too much.
Let's take a look at the field here, and let's start with Little Vic. You were just pointing this out. Little Vic almost had a similar trip that you would envision in this race. Again, he was down on the inside, dealing with some speed. He actually had to negotiate a loose horse late in the race, which isn't always the easiest thing. But you'd imagine now with Kendrick Carmouche aboard and the inside draw, they'll probably want to go right back to the lead with this grade 3 winner, David. He had a really good stretch of races back in 2023, late 2022, early 23, where his buyers were all up in the 90s. Since then, he hasn't been quite as consistent, but you kind of sniffed this race out perfectly. Like, he has the ability to get to a big race, and the pace scenario of this race feels like it could be pretty positive for him.
Yeah, look for a brief moment in mid-stretch like that. Loose horse might actually cost him some serious momentum, but Irad Ortiz kind of deftly eased him back and around that horse, and he was able to continue on to be the first horse with a rider to cross the finish line that day. This is a step up in class from that last race, as you were alluding to. He's got that back class to put him right in the mix against these horses. He was actually a grade 3 winner at Aqueduct going all the way back to March of 2023. We'll see if he can get back to those kinds of speed figures, but maybe a favorable pace scenario will help him out.
The number 2, Top Gunner, is a multiple stakes winner, grade 2 place, and he's coming off a career best effort right now. Probably can say that for a lot of Brad Cox horses who are just rolling. I believe over the last 30 days as of Tuesday, the Brad Cox barn was 26 for their last 68 and 6 for their last 10, just straight up. So it's been more than a month now, David, going into like 2 months where this barn is winning at even more than their normal 30% clip. They're up closer to around 40%.
Yeah, and if you actually look at his numbers with Flavien Prat together, they're winning about 50% of their races over the recent stretch of time. So I think that's going to attract a lot of support Top Gunner's way, but I think a lot of that support will be justified based on his last race. First off, the claim for Brad Cox, and it's kind of interesting. The Brad Cox barn has really ramped up their claiming game over the past few months or so, especially in New York, been claiming a lot more horses than they had over the past several years. And this is one of the success stories. There's been quite a few of them, as this horse stepped up off the claim to win a stakes at Parks, not showing the replay because they ran that race as the sun was going down at the end of that Pennsylvania
Can't see much.
card. A little tough to see, but Top Gunner did take pretty well to rating tactics that day from an outside post, came around rivals and through to win that race, going away at the end, showing a lot better finishing ability for Brad Cox than he had for his prior Barnes. If he repeats that race against some tougher company here, he's going to be a major factor.
And I think the third place finisher out of that race came back, won an allowance race with a 94 Beyer speed figure. So just kind of frank that form a little bit. 24 Mamba, rest in peace, Kobe, as basketball season just started this week. 24 Mamba does have his best races at Belmont at the Big A and his grade 3 place, but just didn't really get involved in the last couple. And he was well behind Little Vic in that most recent race.
Yeah, I'm always looking to make some kind of case for this horse. I've been a fan. I've had success with him in the past. It just feels like he hasn't run his very best races against Stakes Company. It seems like he's a little outclassed at this level, and he's coming off such a poor performance. September 19th was a day at Aqueduct where it seemed like some horses weren't handling the track or the kickback, but he was out of it a long way from home, so he's going to have to run a lot better here.
Next up is Surveillance, multiple stakes winner. Another who was at his best kind of late 22 to early 2023, had some really good races in there. He seems like he might be kind of rounding back into form. You could probably eliminate the grass race last time out where things were a little bit different from him. 2 starts back, that Troy race taken off the turf wasn't bad. I just don't think the form is quite as good, but he's another one. A lot of horses in these races, they have the ability to jump up and run a race this good. They just haven't been doing it week in, week out, or every time we see them on the track. How do you think Surveillance stacks up with this group?
Yeah, I think when you start to take apart his form, it's easier to take a positive view of what he's done recently, because historically, he's been more of a dirt horse than a turf horse. That was especially the case when he was back in the Keith DeSormo barn. So I think it's a good sign that he ran so well on the turf 3 back in Saratoga when that might not even be his preferred surface. Yes, that was for Flying P at a time when they were running everything at Saratoga, but the Wayne Parts barn has been on a pretty strong run over the past couple months at Aqueduct. I thought he was pretty impressive winning that Troy. It was against weaker company, but he hopped up at the start, was off last, and won that race without Tyler Gaffaleone ever asking him for anything close to his best. He was just on cruise control every step of the way. And then last time in that Harvey Peck, turf, maybe not his preferred surface. And also he was down on the inside out of position during a time when it seemed like the outside pads were preferred on the Mellon turf course. So I think he's a little bit dirtied up, and I'm not so sure that he's overmatched at this level.
The next one is My Buddy B, who figures to be pretty close up early on in this race where there's not that much early speed. Didn't get to the lead last time out in the Phoenix, but he was chasing a very fast and a very sharp horse named Federal Judge in there. He is stakes placed. When he stepped up to Graded Stakes Company, he's found them a little too tough before in the past, but this is probably one of his better races against Graded Stakes Company. Going to have a softer group, a more unproven or inconsistent group, and a race that seems to shape up pretty well for him on the front end, David.
Yeah, this horse can be a little bit of an all or nothing type, and you can kind of see that in his career box. I mean, he's had 9 wins and 20 starts in just 2 seconds with no thirds to go along with it. So he shows up and wins, or he typically is a little overmatched. And that's been the case. He's been slightly overmatched against grade 1 and grade 2 company as 2 of his last 3 starts. But I mean, look who he was facing in those races. Nakatomi, Skelly, Federal Judge. They could be among the top 3 or 4 choices in the Breeders' Cup Sprint next week. So he's not facing company like that in this grade 3 event on Saturday. And I thought that race that he won at Parks 2 back was just as strong as the race that Top Gunner turned in, winning a similar listed stakes race at Parks over the past couple months. And My Buddy B is going to be a much bigger price than that Brad Cox trainee. And also, I think he's more likely to exploit a pace scenario that, as you said at the top, seems pretty murky, and he's got the speed to make the front here.
From a value-based standpoint, one of the horses to watch in here. Runnin' Son of a Gun, the 2022 Bold Ruler winner, 0 for the last 8, though. And you start to dive into some of the form, was behind Little Vic last time out, a couple starts back behind Scotland. Just not quite sure if those rivals are a little bit better than this one. You see Little Vic a couple times through the running lines. Running Son of a Gun wants to be probably a horse that drops back a little more and makes a late run. And in this race, there may not be all that much early speed to set it up. What do you think about Running Son of a Gun's chances here?
Yeah, I think this horse has been slowly but surely rounding back into some semblance of his prior form. He obviously hasn't gotten back to the kinds of races that it took to win that Bold Roller back 2 years ago at this point, but he's run some respectable races against high-level optional claiming company, and I think his most recent start was arguably the best race that he's run of this form cycle because he was a little out of position early, was rated towards the back of the pack, and had to come through that kickback that was a little tough to run through on September 19th, and was closing fairly well at the end behind Little Vic. I could arguably want him a little bit more coming out of that race, except for the fact, as you noted, he doesn't have a whole lot of early speed, and I wonder how that's going to play in a race that doesn't feature much pace.
Rounding out the field is Scotland, who looked like a really nice 3-year-old heading into the Travers. He won the Curlin, and in the Travers, he was only 7-1. In the Pennsylvania Derby, he was only 9-2. He showed speed that day, didn't have much finish, and then he was off for the rest of 2023. Showed back up in May of this year. You can dive into some of his races. He faced some solid horses, Anchors, grade 1 plays, multiple stakes winner, grade 1 placed, closed the game, Sugar. Happy as a Choice is pretty sharp, just won a stakes race at Churchill with a 104 buyer and has won 4 of the last 6. And maybe Scotland is rounding back into form with a couple solid efforts now after shaking the rust off. David, I think sometimes we just expect them to immediately pick up off their 3-year-old season, come right back, and then just be awesome at 4. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work just getting back to the level that he was last year. He certainly feels like a horse with one of the higher ceilings in this race.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we saw that ceiling too back at Saratoga when he finally showed some of that brilliance that we had seen as a 3-year-old, winning that optional claimer on July 26th by 3 lengths against what seemed like a solid field at the time. Maybe that race hasn't so much been flattered by run back since then. Scotland, I think, missed a little bit of time. He didn't work for about a month after that race, came back in the Vosburg that we just took a look at the replay for, chasing home Mufasa. Only got an 89 buyer. When I look through that chart and formulator, it feels like that number could have been a little higher, and maybe that's something to keep in mind for Mufasa next week in whichever Breeders' Cup race he participates in, because everybody in that field got a buyer that's a regression from their prior start. And I always wonder if maybe the number came up a little bit low in that situation. I think Scotland fits here. The big question for me is 6 furlongs just a tad too short for him?
Exactly, because it's not like he's a stone cold deep closer, but he just doesn't seem like this is the distance where he gets going at his best. 7 furlongs a mile, probably where you could get better work from him. Sometimes horses that are classy enough can still get the job done, but the race doesn't look like it shapes up all that well for him on paper. Let's take a look at the selections in here, David. I had no choice. I'm a prisoner of the moment right now. I'm going to go to the hot barn, the Brad Cox barn. They've just been rolling along right now, and Top Gunner could sit a pretty good trip close up. You're going to look for a little bit more value in here with My Buddy B on top.
Yeah, obviously I'm afraid of Top Gunner. I just kind of feel like he's going to be one of the shorter prices in this race. And I think My Buddy B has some similar attributes, and he's going to be a much better price. And he's the horse that can probably take advantage of a situation where there doesn't appear to be a lot of pace on paper. And I also think that the number 4 Surveillance, as I said, a little dirtied up and could be a playable price in this spot.
It's going to be a big 7 or 8 days coming up in the world of horse racing. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. We'll have so many previews coming up for big Breeders' Cup races. We want to make sure you make some money, but let's pad the bankroll this weekend with Belmont at the Big A, race 7 in the grade 3 Bold Ruler.
Hey, let me give you a hot tip. If you liked the content that you've seen before, click on the like and subscribe button right here. And of course, for more DRF videos like Race of the Days, stakes previews, click on the videos right here.